This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
Are you a doom scroller? This is Wretched Radio, a new word in the vernacular of the peasantry to describe those of us who love to flip with our pointer finger. Just zip through them stories. Find something interesting, and we can get caught up in something that they are calling doom scrolling, where it is one bad news story after another. It's actually now a word that we're watching, describing the tendency to continue to surf or scroll through bad news, even though the news is saddening, disheartening, or depressing. Another contributor, perhaps, to the depression that we are seeing, which is everywhere. By the way, speaking of depression, I read an article. This is from a doctor. He's an ER doctor, Matthew Sleeth. Consider these statistics and the J-curve that we have seen in depression and suicide within the last couple of years. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among children and adolescents between 10 and 17 years of age in the U.S. What? The number 2 leading cause of death is suicide? Remember that statistic. In the 20 years preceding the pandemic, hospital emergency departments experienced a 92% increase in visits for suicidal ideation and attempts for children. For children. Enter COVID. The CDC, you know those folks, showed that the proportion of pediatric emergency admissions for mental health issues was up 24% for young children and 31% for adolescents compared to the previous year. So there were some things that were negative effects of shutting down the entire economy. These statistics, it's hard to argue that they do not have root in the separation that has been imposed on the nation. Whether you believe that was right, wrong, or indifferent, this is a statistical fact. By the way, this is one of the reasons that we did Drive-By Biblical Counseling, the latest, number 3. It deals with the issues of suicide and depression and anxiety. It's available at wretched.org. We'll also send you a copy. I think we're also sending you a copy of 13 Reasons Why You Should Not Commit Suicide, a booklet that I wrote about the subject. This is why handing out that booklet at university campuses, you can't go wrong. I'll challenge you. If you are near a university that has some foot traffic, it's pretty hard sometimes. It's slower. I think it's still worthwhile. But it's a tech schools. Sometimes, the foot traffic, and it's spread out a little bit differently. You don't see those traffic patterns that you see at bigger universities. But if you're near one, I would challenge you. Get 100 copies of that booklet. You could give them out in less than an hour. I dare you. Back to the statistics from this article. Those who believe in God are between 4 and 6 times less likely to commit suicide as those who don't. And by the way, it just any God where the idea of self-murder is considered a bad act, the statistic nevertheless is true. 4 to 6 times less likely to commit suicide. More from this article from the ER doctor that I think is instructive for us. I have asked hundreds of people if they have ever heard a sermon articulating a biblical worldview of suicide. Not one has. Nor have any of the dozens of pastors I've ever asked shared a suicide prevention message. Pastor, please take note. Every youth pastor, small group leader, church elder, college minister, board member, and Sunday school teacher should know what to do if they encounter a person who may be suicidal. They should be told exactly what questions to ask and what steps to take. This policy should be in writing and shared widely. You can find it. Just use your Google machine and you will find that information because the statistics are alarming and they are affecting people inside of the church who are dealing with their problems wrongly. That's all there is to it. This is why biblical counseling is so helpful. One of these days, we'll play a presentation from Dr. Charles Hodges. He's a medical doctor who was speaking at the ACBC conference in 2016, talking about the deficiencies of the DSM. There are 300 different types of ways of having a mental disorder, 300 different ways of having depression and anxiety, fear of man. And one of them, I can't remember, but it was something like disruptive delusional behavior outburst syndrome. Tantrums. Those are tantrums. They've now got a labeling in the DSM. And what hope is there? You're going to put your kid on a couch and talk to him about it? How do you feel about that, son, when you flail on the ground? How are you feeling when you're just kicking and screaming in the middle of the target? How do you feel about that? How's about this? The Bible interprets a key component of biblical counseling. It interprets what is going on in a person's mind and heart biblically. This is what God says about it. A child throwing a tantrum is sinning. Oh, well, that's good news, because you can actually use some biblical tools then to drive that out of them and to lead them to repentance, receive forgiveness, and act in a more godly way. That's hopeful. What hope is there in secular counseling for the person who's depressed? I'll be real honest with you up front, ma'am. Not one person I've ever talked to has actually been cured from their depression. How many people have you counseled on this? Hundreds. Not one. Just so you know that. And by the way, this is $250 an hour. How's about biblical counseling, which is free inside of churches? Oh, by the way, got to do a shout out. The Biblical Counseling Conference. Is this a shout out on a shout out? I think I'm shouting out on a shout out. ACBC is having their fall annual conference in Charlotte, North Carolina. I understand it's lovely there. You can also do it virtually. biblicalcounseling.com/events. They do a number of things around the country. biblicalcounseling.com/events. The theme, "O Church, Arise, Reclaiming a Culture of Care Inside of the Church." Was just reading about Thomas Baxter. He's the fellow who wrote that massive tome on biblical counseling. They did biblical counseling in their church. And you actually had to go through the catechism before you did the biblical counseling, so you could have your theological ducks in a row. Then you would actually receive biblical counseling. This goes back centuries to what we used to call soul care. And that is what biblical counseling is today. If your church isn't involved, I encourage you to do so. Doom scrolling, leading to an awful lot of depression, sadness, anger. Do you find yourself getting annoyed with everybody? If you do, check your temperature on this. I've noticed it's really easy. We're reading how much more bonkers stuff do we need to read? To just, what? This is just insanity. You idiots. Hold on. Maybe it's because we're doom scrolling and we're consuming so much toxic news that it's coming out in a nasty fashion. While it may be fruitful to watch some of these things from the article on doom scrolling, we also need to remember that every headline is a sales pitch crafted to grab our attention, accrue clicks, make money. Media companies profit from our addiction to doom scrolling. They're motivated to keep us doing it, drawing us constantly from one horrific headline to the next, from one can't turn away breathtaking news disaster to another. And you and I would do well to get a handle on it. Christians should reflect on how their digital habits are helping or hindering their discipleship. What is doom scrolling doing to your soul? Ask your family, are you more pleasant today than you were a year ago? Help each other. And take it when they maybe go, nah, actually, you're pretty sour. Well, isn't it better to receive the wounds of a friend than the kisses of an enemy? For one, it fuels our anger. Doom scrolling is like stacking logs on a campfire to heighten the flames. With every new article, we discover new links, new outrages that increase the heat of our anger because it stokes us. It shapes our hearts to delight in calamity. And the Bible tells us, no, we should rejoice in something good. I've actually got something good for you. All right, this is my interpretation of a story that surveyed people who are Black Americans. There we go again with the segregation. Here, let this seep in. Let this go. Okay, well, that's positive. That's actually a good thing. They polled 8,660 black Americans to ask them, what's important to you about church? The congregation is welcoming, 80%. Sermons are inspiring, 77%. Congregation is in your denomination, 30%. But then I thought this was interesting. Do you know what comes in at 14% as a primary need for black Americans when it comes to church? 14%. Leaders share your race or ethnicity. 13% said most people attending share your race or ethnicity. Hey, I'm not real good at math, but that's like 86, 87% who don't view it that way. Now, I don't know if we can interpret these statistics this broadly, but that's way more people who are not as heated about the race issue as we are being told and being encouraged to actually hate. Shouldn't that make our hearts happy? That's positive, and that maybe we can actually be polite to one another and kind to one another and loving to one another, knowing that maybe despite the current narrative, not everybody hates everybody else. Oh, the effects of doom scrolling. This is Wretched Radio.
Hey,
Todd.
sweetie.
Take her around the block a few times?
Who's a good girl? You're not, because nobody does good. No, not one. Romans 5 says we're born in sin and iniquity, and our hearts are deceitful and wicked. You know that if you'd use the law, which brings about the knowledge of sin.